just waiting for you to do, to do, to do, to do, to
Hanging in there, you?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Trying to balance life with a newborn.
Yeah.
Not easy, but we're making it happen.
Dude, enjoy it because they grow up fucking quick, dude.
Yeah.
Is this your first one?
Yeah. Yep. First
Hey,
one.
man, that's awesome, dude. It's
Yeah,
like
man.
the best feeling in the world, right?
Oh my God. Every morning when I wake up and I see him and he smiles at me, there's
Yeah, it's
priceless.
like you think you love your family, but you don't really know like real love until you have a kid, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's changed everything in a lot of great ways.
Yep. Yep.
So let's get down to business. So, for listeners that don't know, there have been quite a few whales dying and washing up on the shores of Jersey, New York, and there's a lot of different theories floating around as to why this is happening. So I figured I'd give John a call because he's the number one guy I talk to about conservation, and I'd love to hear what you think is going on here, John.
Well, uh, first, let me say it's really concerning. Um, it doesn't bode well for the fishing season, or there's really no telling what's going on here. Before I give you guys my opinion, I should be clear that I'm not a scientist. I'm just a fisherman. I've got some experience in the fisheries management realm, but this is kind of out of that, and nobody really knows what's going on. Um, it just seems like once a week for the past 3 months, there's another whale washing up. And when it first started happening, whale strandings aren't anything new along the East Coast. I mean, it seemed like we get one or two or three a year somewhere along the coast. But this is not that. This is like freaking 20 in the last 3 months, over 20, actually. And my initial, so I know a little bit about wind power. I was on the council for 9 years, and there were a lot of discussions about offshore wind, and I even went over to the UK and ground truth some of their wind farms out there, and I spoke with all the fishermen and all the fisheries liaisons. And there was no indication back then that this was going to be harmful. Of course, the commercial fleet was saying it was going to be harmful, it was going to put them out of business. And I understand that because it's pretty difficult to troll a bottom troll through a bunch of, wind arrays. That's, understandably, they were upset about it. But from a recreational fishing perspective, they just seemed good to me. You're putting all that structure in what's really a structuralist environment in Lower New York Harbor or the New York Bight in general. And I thought, man, this is going to be epic. But now, some of the details are starting to manifest themselves. And they're not. There's going to be some impact without a doubt. The question is whether or not the surveys that they're doing are causing these whale strandings. And my initial impression was that they weren't, because what they're using are. I mean, there's all sorts of folks saying, "Oh, it's seismic testing," which are essentially air gun blasts to try to map out the bottom, but they aren't really used for wind power surveys, because wind power surveys don't need to know what's a quarter mile to 2 miles underneath the seafloor. They just need to know if there's going to be a stable place where they could drive pilings in. So I thought, what's going on here is likely, you have a crap ton of whales following a bunker school, or numerous bunker schools and numerous herring schools. And, I talked to one of the guys who works for me, is a apprentice for the Sandy Hook pilot, and he's out there, pretty much every day. And he says, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of whales around. So what I figured was happening is you have this enormous concentration of whales, and they're kind of swimming in and out of the channel, or they get on these bunker schools in the channel and they're getting hit. But my opinions change a little bit about on that because we're talking about 20 whales now. Like it's too much. It's too much to just blame it on ship traffic. So something's going on, and they're using sonar to survey the body, not the bottom, not seismic testing. And sonar, of course, has some impact too. But and you look at the Navy sonar, that's clearly had an effect on whales in other parts of the world. But apparently the sonar that the wind surveyors are using was created to avoid impacting marine mammals. And another thing that should be made clear is that sonar only impacts toothed whales, not baleen whales, according to the most recent science. And baleen whales are the ones, the humpbacks and the sperm whale. Well, sperm whales are toothed whales, but humpbacks and even a right whale are not. So,
Yeah.
yeah, to put it simply, I really don't know what's going on. And uh, you talk to the science folks. I used to have a contract with the New England Aquarium. I would take their whale biologists out, so I know those folks, and we've been talking about this. And there's no credible scientists out there that will say that these sonars are disrupting whales' hearing or navigation systems. So I just I also don't want to say that they're not either, because the correlation to the testing certainly seems suspect. I really don't know. And the other thing that's coloring this whole debate is, like, you clearly have political interests on one side that hate green energy, and then you have the ENGO community on the other side that maybe loves green energy too much. So all these posts from people saying definitively that these survey boats are causing this. It's some of it's politically motivated, and it's hard to kind of believe what they're saying because it's very clear where it's coming from.
Yeah.
But then you look at the other side on the ENGO community, and they don't seem to be questioning at all. And I don't see, I can't for the life of me understand why they won't just shut it down for now. And just if there's even an inclination that they're causing it, shut the freaking thing down. Let's figure it out. But instead, it's like a freight train. You can't stop it. It's moving, and unless there's some real science that says these are without a doubt causing these whale mortality events, then it's going to keep going.
It seems like one of those things where by the time they get the science to, by the time they collect all the data to tell us, oh yeah, you know what, it was causing it. It's going to be too late anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm kind of worried about this fishing season. I mean, if it's killing whales, it's going to be having an effect on fish too. Now, with that in mind, I don't want to put myself out of business here by saying that. You talk to when I speak with the pilot, the kid that works for me, he will say that, yeah, there's still a ton of life out there. I mean, it doesn't appear to be chasing the whales or the bait away. So hopefully, we're not in a bad place once we start tuna fishing. Um, so fingers crossed on that
Yeah,
front.
right. So in
Yeah.
terms of these windmills, I've been reading different things about them, the pros and cons about them. Are they even worth it? I mean, do they produce enough energy for it
So
to be worth it to put them in?
I'm not really capable to speak on that, but from what I understand, the ones over in Europe are heavily subsidized by the government because they are not efficient at all.
Yeah.
Um, you're talking about having to maintain these things that are in the most corrosive environment in the world, and guess what? It takes diesel to get your ships out there and get your personnel.
Exactly. Exactly.
But I kind of look at them from a parochial standpoint, like how are they going to benefit me? And I think once everything is settled and these things are out there, you're going to have all that structure, and it's going to hold fish. I mean, it's you and I both know fish gravitate to structure, and there's some science out there that indicates it not only does it attract fish, but it increases biodiversity. It actually increases productivity. And I can't see that not happening, but who the hell knows, man? It could be, And I'll tell you what I'm really worried about, and from day one I was worried about this more than any surveyor surveying or anything like that, is during construction they have to drive these piles into the bottom, and that's going to be an incredible amount of noise pollution, and that is undoubtedly going to f up the fishing in that specific area. I mean, do I think it'll ruin it? Do I think, the fish will leave forever? I don't. I think it'll be temporary, but it's still going to suck. Um,
Speaking of things that are going to suck, what is up with this potential law they're trying to put in place that captains can't go past a certain speed because
yeah.
of
Well,
is it right
so
whales?
yeah, and it sucks for me in particular because I have a 36-foot boat, and the cutoff is 35 foot. So if
Ugh.
you're 35 foot, and I mean that there's a law in place right now that prohibits 65-foot boats from going over 10 knots inside of a certain area. What they did with this proposed rule is instead of they greatly increased the area to pretty much include the entire East Coast down to Georgia, and out to 100 miles for yeah, starting in November and extending through May. So I'm basically losing tuna fishing in November, December, and all of May. But this is the thing. I mean, it's kind of a worthless proposed rule because there's no way they could possibly monitor or enforce that. Now I'm kind of in a unique situation because I'm a little bit under the spotlight given the positions I've held and the enemies I've made over the years. If, if I get caught out there, burning 50 knots, then I'm going to be in real trouble. But I don't think anybody else has anything to worry about. It's just a proposed rule right now. It's being considered. I mean, hopefully there was enough public comment to convince NOAA Fisheries how ridiculous this is, because it's not going to do anything for the right whale. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, we just, I've been pretty much running full-time charters for 20 years, and I've never seen a freaking right whale ever. They just don't. If they do come through here, and of course they do, they're in transit. They're not feeding. They're going from point A to point B. Their spawning areas down in off the coast of Georgia and northern Florida. I'm sorry, yeah, South Carolina, Georgia, something like that. Um, the other thing is they feed on krill, and we just don't have the krill blooms that New England has. So it's ridiculous. It's like virtue signaling. Like, look, we're doing something. Like they're in The Simpsons. Look, I'm helping, but they're not doing a damn thing. They're just putting good people, out of work. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it's really gonna affect me poorly. And my 36-foot boat is all of a sudden worth nothing. You know? Yeah, it's
So
ridiculous.
so
I
right
mean,
now it's still just a proposal. It's not. It hasn't been passed through.
yeah, I mean, I expect they'll make a decision on, what sort of rule they're going to implement pretty soon. And it might be a lot more watered down than what they initially proposed, or it might not be. I know that the ENGOs are going to sue if it's not what they want, but that's nothing new.
Oh man. So is it one of these things where, like everything else, it just comes down to who has the most money, like the people that want to, you know, close it down and
Yeah,
protect the
well,
whales, like if they have enough money
yeah,
to throw around.
I don't know if I would say that, but it's exposing some of the real flaws in the Endangered Species Act. Um, it's like how far are we willing to go to protect the species that's, you know, it's it's really being affected by a lot more than just gear entanglements and ship strikes. I mean, their whole food source is kind of diminished greatly, and as a result, they don't spawn like they used to. So I think they're either going to have a major spawning event or they're just going to slowly go extinct. The question is whether or not you wreak havoc on the coastal community uh, to try to prevent that, even though you can't really prove that these measures are going to do anything.
Yeah. I mean, look at
Um,
what they're doing to the lobster guys up in Maine.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the lobster guys have been incredibly proactive with gear that breaks off if a whale swims into it. they're even experimenting with ropeless gear. It'd be a real tragedy if we lost our lobster industry over a species that's likely going to go extinct no matter what we do, unless
Yeah.
sort of production event. And you look at the history of right whales, it's like a boom and bust thing.
Yeah. I
They all of a
mean,
sudden
weren't they
1 year
named
after,
right whales because they were the right whale to hunt because they just sit there and you
yeah,
go right up to
yeah.
them and blast them? Yeah.
So when I wrote about this, I got quite a bit of backlash by saying this. I mean, they're the right whale because they're lazy and a little bit stupid, and you just the old harpoon fleet used to take a dory right up to them and they wouldn't move, and then they stick a harpoon in them and they just roll over and die. They're docile creatures, and that's not their fault. But it doesn't make it untrue that they are, you know, in my objective or mostly objective opinion is that if you can't coexist in the ocean with other species, then you're going to go extinct. I mean, that's just evolution, and human beings are those species. And then don't get me wrong, I think we should do whatever we can within reason to try to protect or bring that species back, but they have to be it has to be an effective rule that you could actually enforce, and this just isn't it.
They're more worried about the whales eating krill than you feeding your family.
Yeah, more or less. And this all ties into the humpback mortality, the ship strikes that are happening now. And it's kind of showing NOAA fisheries that we do hit whales, and
Oh, it's proving their point.
that's true.
Yeah.
We do hit whales, but we don't really hit right whales, at least not around here.
Yeah. I was thinking too, and I was reading this article that was listing it was like whales and their causes of death in the past 6 months or whatever. And
Hmm.
they blame a lot of it on ship strike, but who's to say that that blasting disoriented them? They're flopping
Yeah.
around on the surface, then they get hit, or they were already dead and they got hit.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, so yeah, and I think it's important to note that these surveys have been going on for the last 7 years. This is nothing particularly new, but it's entirely possible that this is the perfect storm. You have an incredible aggregation, extraordinary aggregation of whales during the winter when they usually aren't there, and you have a number of boats surveying at the same time. Even though these are low impact sonars, given the number of whales and given the shipping traffic, it could just be creating this scenario where, you have disoriented whales and ships going in and out of the channel, and it's whacking them.
it seems
But
like
that's 100% speculation. I've got no science behind that at all, but it seems like a likely scenario.
I got you. It seems like the majority of people following this seems like almost everyone believes that it's because of this seismic testing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been a lot of social media and yeah, I think you mentioned the oil companies kind of behind these groups pushing these narratives, um, and it's very political at the same time. I think it's easy just to blame it on the sonar, but I also think we have to kind of keep an open mind. I'm not 100% convinced it's a sonar, but I'm not convinced it's not the sonar either.
Right.
Um, but it's easy to see how the masses would believe that it is the sonar because the correlation. I mean, it's hard to not think it's the sonar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it seems like, every year there's a few whales that get
Hmm.
beached and whatnot, but this right now is just something that I don't know. No one's ever seen anything
Yeah,
like it.
yeah, and what's incredibly irritating about all this is that NOAA, while they have been issuing some press releases, they're pretty tight-lipped, and there's like zero transparency, and nobody's getting out in front of it and saying, "Hey, listen, this isn't the sonar because of X, Y, and Z." They're just kind of like not saying anything, which makes people suspicious. It makes me suspicious.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
But
At least say
having
something.
worked with, yeah, having worked with NOAA the last couple of decades on the council and the commission as well, they don't move quickly. They move very slow, and everything has to be vetted and everything has to be signed, from the top. If they're going to release information, it's got to go through a number of different uh, hurdles before it does. So
Right.
maybe we'll see something. I don't know. I mean, the
S-
good news is we haven't had one in a couple of weeks, in 3 weeks, I think. You know what I also
It's
saw though,
crazy
and
to
I
even hear you say that.
yeah,
Like,
right. Well, I mean, there's also, another conspiracy theory out there. I shouldn't even call it a conspiracy theory because it may be true, is that Noah put a ship out there to pick up all the dead whales so they don't float inshore.
wow.
But I will say that the guy who works for me that works on the pilot boat has not seen any floaters in a few weeks either. So
Well, this article I was reading before the interview was talking about one that a fisherman saw dead out there, and then when they went back to look for it, it was gone. Maybe it was that ship picking them up.
yeah, yeah.
That's
I mean,
crazy.
I wouldn't discount it, but I also I'm trying hard not to believe all the scuttlebutt.
Yeah, I know. It's a world filled with conspiracy theories these days.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you're either on one far side of it or your other far side. It's hard to find people in the middle.
Yeah,
Like, maybe it's a sonar, maybe it isn't. Everybody's just like, it's definitely the sonar. It's definitely not the sonar.
yeah. So in terms of this proposal for the speed of the boats and the zoning and ever, who's deciding all that?
No fisheries.
So that's all no. I mean, who influences that decision other than I mean,
Well, unfortunately, they have to follow the Endangered Species Act, and if they don't, there's a whole bunch of environmental non-government organizations lining up to sue the shit out of them if they don't do what's necessary to keep the species from going extinct.
this is fucking crazy.
And no kidding, I know.
It
It's
really
like
is.
the
It's
general,
almost like they found a loophole. They're like,
yeah.
as if I don't want to go too far off, but I don't even think any of these fuckers care about right whales. I think they're getting paid. Somebody's telling them, hey, you got to do this, and they're doing it. I don't know. A lot of I'm probably going to edit this out. I probably won't, but a lot of the conspiracy theories that I heard about back in like 2005,
Mhm.
a lot of them came true. Like, so,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on out here.
Yeah, I don't know either, man. I would like to say definitively, I know what's going on, but I really don't. And it's irritating that NOAA is not being more transparent here.
And there's nobody there that that you could give a little nudge to and be like, hey, like, what are you guys doing?
Uh, Believe me, I've reached out and everybody's being real tight-lipped. I really don't believe that the necropsy people, the biologists that are doing the necropsies, are are lying. I mean, they're scientists. Even if they were getting orders from above to lie on these necropsy reports, I don't believe that these scientists would do it. And
Yeah.
if they did, if they were asked to do it, I'm almost certain that there'd be at least one whistleblower.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's very hard to determine acoustic damage. So, the ship strikes are apparent, but why they're getting hit by ships is hard to determine.
So, in terms of the amount of ships that they have out there doing this testing, do you have any idea, like roughly how many they have out there doing this every day?
I think it's three of them right now, but it differs daily. You have to go onto the AIS and look. Um, but it's currently, last I looked, there were three of them out there and kind of like that Ambrose South area.
What's AIS? Where?
Automated information. So it shows you where the boats are. Like if
Gotcha.
you're above 65 foot, you have to have your AIS on at all times so other people can see where you are.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, gosh, I was going to say something. I totally forgot what it was. It's been happening more and more to me.
You think this is going to impact the tuna fishing?
Um, I mean, my gut is saying no, but my gut is wrong sometimes, a lot of the time. I think they're highly pelagic And if we don't have them, well, first of all, right now, all this testing is being done, you know, inshore of where the tuna usually show up, unless we're talking about December, then, they're in that area.
Yeah.
But I also understand that they're doing survey work out in 180 fathoms in that Texas Tower to Atlantic Princess area. But I think, it's the water's so much deeper out there, and tuna are so highly pelagic, like they swim from point A to point B all the time. If they don't like what's going on near a certain survey boat, they're going to take off and, run another 20 miles east or something. I think there's going to be tuna somewhere. It might not be where the survey boats are. And it might not. Tuna don't rely on acoustics to navigate either, like whales do. So it might not affect them at all.
How long are they planning on doing all this testing for? When's it gonna end?
Well, they started in March, the 30 fathom area. I think they're going all the way through July, but I'd have to look at the notice. I'm trying not to worry about it right now because there's nothing I could do about it. But it does worry the shit out of me.
Oh, I bet it's going all the way to July.
But
Shit.
yeah, but if they're not there, I'm just gonna run to the Quimper area. That's all.
Oh man. So what's the solution, John? What's the? Is there any? What can
You
the
know, I
average person
I
do?
kind of I kind of started off believing that these wind farms are going to be real good for us. I think I mentioned that, but now, I'm not so sure. It would be nice if they would just leave it alone, just leave the ocean alone. But I think that ship has sailed. I think this has already gone far enough to where we can't stop it. We could certainly, when they start doing the environmental impact statements, which is a requirement before they do any construction, and we'll just have to weigh in. Um, that's really the only thing I think we could do.
Yeah, I saw there was like a big protest in Point Pleasant. Some people got
Yeah,
together there, but
yeah. Well, you got to understand that fishermen are a very small part of the entire community, and generally, you talk to somebody from Manhattan, and they don't give a shit whether or not it's going to blow the fish out for a few years or forever. They want green energy. I don't mean to sound defeatist, but and we for sure we have to make our concerns known. But do I think we're going to stop these things at this point? I don't.
it's a it's a hard enough job, huh? Now you got to
Yeah,
add this to it.
it's the dumbest fucking business in the world, man. Every year there's something different, whether it's like a pandemic or fuel prices or these fucking wind farms. It's like, come on, man, just give me a couple of years where I could like time to burn and make some money.
Oh man. So what are you thinking in terms of the striper season this year? You think it's going to be hot?
I do. Last year was probably the best year I've had in 10 years. Um, you're going to have your guys that say the sky is falling and we need a moratorium and game fish, but it's getting kind of silly now because, the fishing has been so good. And it's not just, I mean, absolutely lower New York Harbor kind of had the mass of fish, but if you talk to people up and down the coast, with the exception of the Chesapeake Bay, really, that most people saw more fish last year than they'd seen in a while, and absolutely the stock seems to be on the rise, and that's not just anecdotal. The numbers kind of indicate the same. I think there's both good and bad in that. I mean, it's good that we have all these fish around, but the bad part is that there's been a documented increase in fishing mortality because there's more fish to catch and more people are going and they know how good it is. So we're likely going to have overfishing, you know, once the meeting happens in May. We're probably going to be overfishing again. We're probably going to have to readjust the size and the bag limit, or just the size limit. What that looks like, I don't know yet. It might be a 36-inch fish, or it might be, lowering the slot down to 34 inches or 32 inches. I don't know. But damn, the fish has been real good, both in the spring and the fall. I really had a really great bass year.
So do you like the slot size the way it is now, or would you adjust
So I,
that?
So I was not a fan of the slot limit when they put it in place. I thought, it's not gonna do anything on the conservation side, 'cause people are just gonna kill a bunch of fish before they reach the slot size. But I, y- honestly, dude, I've seen more 40s, 50s, even a few 60s in the last 3 years than I've seen in my entire life. And guess what, man? A lot of those fish that we catch that are big have scarring on their jaw, like they've been caught before. So I think we're seeing some access to these larger fish because they're not ending up in some guy's cooler in Rhode Island or Cape Cod. And you look at the fishing mortality estimates, and absolutely, it's driving fishing mortality down. And just anecdotally on the water, you turn the radio on, everybody's complaining about not being able to catch a keeper. They're either too small or they're too big. So
Right.
absolutely, I'm kind of a fan of it now, to be honest with you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I think one of the last times we spoke, the concern was that class of striped bass that was in that slot limit was going to get over harvested, and then that
Yeah.
was going to
Well,
have.
so yeah, I mean, and that's essentially what's happened last year. We had those big fish move in October, and then in November, they were on the adult bunker, and then in November, all those peanuts started coming out of the bay, and then you had all those slot fish, and those were likely the 2015s that we were trying to like husband through till they recruited and spawned. But it's there's so many of them, and it's hard for me to listen to people talk about how dire a situation we are with striped bass when the level of abundance is it's the best I've seen it in 10 years. I think I don't think we're out of the forest or we're out of the woods yet with striped bass, but I think that we're definitely getting there, and it's definitely the stock is definitely increasing. Now I should mention that there's been some pretty poor uh, production coming out of the Chesapeake. Striped bass are anadromous; they spawn in fresh water, and the Chesapeake is the largest estuary on the East Coast, and that we've seen a downward trend in striped bass being produced in the Chesapeake. But I also think you know there's some climate change stuff going on there. It's trending downward, whereas the Hudson and Delaware estuaries are trending upward. Now I don't know if those estuaries are big enough to account for all the fish that came out of the Chesapeake, but I also think there's some adaptation going on here as a result of climate change.
Tell me a little bit more about that in terms of the climate change
Well,
aspect.
so it's to have a good spawn in the Chesapeake, you have to. You don't have to, but generally the good spawns are when you have very cold winter and you have snow build up, and then when March April rolls around, all that melts off and you get the runoff and big hit of fresh water, water, and so the juvie striped bass have food to eat. And it's not a matter of how many juvies are produced, but it's survivability. It's that 1 year survivability. And, whether it's a multi-decadal oscillation or whether it's climate change, we just haven't had those conditions. Um, so really our last good spawning year was 2015. Everything's been bad since that. Um, so, what the fishery is going to look like 7, 8 years down the road when those Chesapeake Bay fish recruit, it might, be a shadow of what it looks like now. But I also think, and I'm hoping that the Hudson and Delaware estuaries, as well as the dozen other estuaries up the East Coast that are smaller, but definitely seem to be producing more, pick up the slack.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Why why do you want people to stop saying game fish and moratorium?
Well, I don't think we need. I mean, moratorium is almost laughable when you're out in lower New York Harbor in the afternoon in November, and there's literally thousands of fish blitzing as far as you can see, and all along the coast. It's similar scenario until you get down to the Chesapeake Bay. I also think that people need to understand that discard mortality, the number of fish that we release. Apparently, it's 1 in 10 or 1 in 11 fish that we release dies, and that's an estimate, but I think it's probably pretty close to the truth. when you extrapolate that across the entire recreational fishing community, it adds up to be an awful lot. And no, it's actually 50% of the total overall mortality. I mean, it dwarfs the commercial fishery. So when people talk about a moratorium, if they think it's just going to be a catch and release fishery, well, for one, that doesn't really address, one of the big problems or big sources of mortality. But number two, um, it's a fairness issue. I mean, if you're going to constrain a fishery and you're going to push the burden on to people who are responsible for the overfishing, well, you have to extend some of that burden to the catch and release folks because they're responsible for fishing mortality too. And for that reason, there's been a lot of talk about no target closures, which means you can't even fish, can't even be out there fishing for striped bass, which is kind of silly. It's almost impossible to enforce. But again, like with the whale proposed rule, the right whale proposed rule, there are guys like me that are going to have to comply. I mean, I can't market catch and release striped bass fishing if it's illegal. So, and these are real proposals, and then a lot of them were in Amendment 7. I mean, thankfully we got them taken off the table because people around the table held my view that we didn't need that yet. But you know, getting down the road here and having to have more constraining measures, I'm absolutely certain those no target closures will be put back on the table. So we don't want a moratorium. We don't need a moratorium. It's kind of silly when people say that. I think it's an easy way just to react if you're fed up. The perception is that the commission doesn't do anything and they don't care about striped bass. And the knee-jerk reaction is like, moratorium, or we just need to make it a game fish and F the commercial guys, even when the commercial guys don't really account for most of that fishing mortality. So
Yeah, the commercial guys catch a lot of heat for that, I feel like.
yeah, I mean, really, they're only 10% of the fishery. And when you have a discard mortality rate that's 50% of the fishery, it kind of makes it disingenuous to say, let's get rid of the commercial fishery and all our problems will be, taken care of. They won't.
Do you think and I'll probably catch some heat for even asking this, but do you think the majority of the people crying moratorium and game fish are surf casters?
Um, no, I think it's a combination of stakeholders. It's like, it's the fly fishing community, it's the surf casters. I'm kind of part of that too. And, I've tried to explain things to folks, but if you don't really understand the context, it's easy to say things like game fishing moratorium.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
But the casting thing is interesting because since we had these huge aggregations of bunker and not sand eels or spearing or something else, the fish just haven't really pushed up on the beach. I mean, they do push up on the beach, but it's not a consistent thing like it used to. And I think casters tend to look at that as, there's less fish around. And, I don't think that's the case.
yeah. No offense, surf casters. I just
Yeah, not at all.
hear a lot of you guys, that's where
Yeah.
I personally hear the call for the game fish and the moratorium.
Yeah.
It's
And
usually
let
surf
me
guys.
clarify that I think the surf casting community is one of the most hard-nosed, conservation-minded group out there, and we've served
Absolutely.
a
Absolutely.
lot. Yeah, I mean they're great people, and hopefully we'll get to a point where the fish do start moving back up on the beach.
Wasn't
So,
there some data that came out a couple years ago that said half of the fish that get released die? It seemed like when I heard
no.
about that,
So
it wasn't one in like
so
11. It was
yeah. Well, so that's a lot of people get confused about that's 50% statistic. 50% is 50% of all of striped bass mortality comes from discard mortality. And the way that number is derived is that, 1 in 10 fish die extrapolated across the entire fishing community, the recreational fishing community. That adds up to 50% of total mortality.
And how do they get that data? I mean, how do they know that fish that swam away
So
popped up
the
dead
nine
10 minutes
percent
later?
the 9% discard mortality rate was Paul Diodati, back in the 90s did a study with some of his colleagues where they caught a bunch of stripers in an enclosed pond, drained the pond, and figured out which ones were dead and which ones were still alive. And it doesn't really seem like a good way to do things. I mean, it doesn't seem like the best available science to me. But just after spending the last 2 decades targeting striped bass, 100 days a year, it's pretty close. Like out of the 10 fish I catch, one of them is going to be gill hooked, one of them is going to be gut hooked. And then there's the fish that, you know, some jerk off, not on my boat, on other boats, want to keep their 40-pound fish out of the water for 5 minutes when they take pictures, and they throw it back in and they say, yeah, it swam away. Well, it probably died.
Yeah, that experiment. I think we got to do another one.
Well, there's some work being done at Massachusetts DMF, Department of Marine Fisheries,
Oh, cool.
and it's a lot more extensive. They're putting tags in fish, and particularly they're putting tags in the fish's tail so they could see when it's swimming and then when it stops swimming. When it's because that tail movement it indicates they're still alive.
Ah,
But from what and it's not been completed or peer reviewed yet. But from what I understand, their initial numbers are pretty close to 9%,
wow.
10%. Yeah, I was a
Yeah.
little worried about that study because I thought it was going to indicate a lot higher than 9%.
Oh, yeah. No, that's pretty interesting. It's kind of the same. I'll be interested to see when those results come out for sure, as I'm sure the rest of the community will be too.
I know that there's a lot of folks questioning that 9% number that are saying none of the fish I release die. Well, yeah, I don't see that. I mean, even if you're fly fishing, 1 in 10 fish are going to ingest that fly mid strip. It just happens.
Yeah.
And discard mortality is to be expected with a fishery that's highly valued for its sport fishing qualities, not for just throwing fish in the cooler. Of course, you're going to have high discards in a fishery like that. And if you look at tarpon or snook or bonefish, that's just part of how they manage the fishery. It's discards are to be expected, and that's just part of the fishery. The only other option is to shut it down.
Yeah.
Of course, that 9% discard mortality rate is way better than 100% mortality rate when you throw it in the cooler. But my point really is that just don't ask for a moratorium unless you're willing to do no target closures.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, discards, I'm not worried about it. I don't think it's a terrible thing. It's just part of the fishery.
I remember talking to you on the podcast a couple of years ago. At this point, it might have been 3 years ago. I don't know. Time flies, but it was back when you couldn't find a bluefish anywhere to save your life. It was
Yeah.
like they were gone. Have you noticed that they've kind of come back a little bit?
Yeah. And you're aware that we went from a 15 fish bag limit, a 10 fish bag limit to a 3 fish bag limit. I
Yeah.
think it's 5 or 20. And I would like to say that had something to do with the resurgence, but I really don't think it did. I think bluefish are highly cyclical, and there was overfishing occurring, but it was a result of a lack of fish being around also. And if you look at the history of bluefish, you get super abundance and then years where you don't have any. You talk to the guys that fished in the 70s, they're like, I don't know, for some reason bluefish disappeared for 10 years and then they came back. We still don't have the fishery that we used to have, but it seems to be getting better and better every year, and there's more bluefish around.
Yeah. How do you feel about the potential emergence of a cobia fishery?
I think it's hard to argue that that's not directly related to climate change. Um,
Yeah.
I didn't really get in on that because I was tuna fishing the whole time. I'd see the bunker schools on the way back in, and we'd snag or rig one and put it back out there. It just seems like we got sharked all the time. I never really figured out how to do it because I didn't really invest the time. But
Right.
man, people did real well with those things, and I expect that they will again this year. It's really it's a new fishery, man.
Yeah. It seems like every
Badass.
year it's getting better and
Yeah,
better.
yeah, man. Yep, I might actually try to catch them next year. We'll see how the tuna fishery shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't, if they pass that proposal, you might have to
Yeah, I
start doing
know.
inshore cobia.
But the truth is, July, August, September, even most of June, I'm offshore pretty much every day that I could possibly get out there. So we'll see.
What's the craziest thing you saw offshore this past season?
Um, let's see. Well, we were on a fish for probably an hour and a half, and we had a great white swim by the boat, and I'm like, great, well, yeah. This thing was from my console on the 36 all the way back to the engine motors, so probably about like 17, 18 feet, really big fish. And it ended up, we had that thump and then dead weight. And as the guy was reeling in, like another thump, and then we were broke off. And then the shark swims right by the boat with like 50 yards of braid hanging out of its mouth.
Oh my god!
Yeah, pretty funny.
Was that the first great white you've seen out there?
No, it was the first one I seen. I mean, this thing was so close, you could see like all the scars all over its body. Like it was
Wow.
like it had been through some battles. The other thing we did was we caught some big eye this year on jigs, and that was pretty awesome.
Was that a first for you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we never really targeted them. We just actually, most guys get them trolling, and that's not really my thing. We were just
No
out
shit.
edge jigging, and yeah, we doubled up, and one of them got tail wrapped, and we got it to the boat, and I'm like, holy crap, this is a 250-pound yellowfin. I've never seen one that big, and then we got in the boat, and it was a big eye. And then the other one we landed too. It came in pretty short order. I was always told they were great fighters and the best fighters around. But,
Really?
we got one in probably 30 minutes.
Wow.
And they're both 70, 75 inches, right around there. Nice fish.
What was the biggest bluefin you got this year? Last year?
Um, we didn't do any of the well, we went giant fishing a couple times, didn't catch any. That was kind of like a hit or miss thing this year. But we had one in late May that was I think 76 inches.
Wow.
A little over 200 pounds. That was on a popper too.
So so the inshore tuna bite wasn't as hot as the year before, huh?
It wasn't. There were. I think it had to do with a number of things. One, there were so many sharks out there, in July that you really couldn't get a bait in without getting sharked almost right away. So you go out there with 3 dozen bunker, and they'd all be gone by 8 o'clock in the morning. Once the sharks left, I know there were a few days where guys did really well. We weren't out there on any of those days. The yellowfin fishing was so good that there was really no reason for me to mess around with that. And frankly, like I have the attention span of a 10-year-old, so like sitting out there watching balloons all day, it drives me nuts.
Not going to happen for
This is
you.
what you got to do, to catch those. But we did do it a couple of times. We struck out both times. But the other thing is people always question whether or not those fish were always there, and I tend to think that they were because everybody, you always see them crashing through bunker schools randomly, and
Yeah.
guys hook them up on poppers occasionally, and very rarely would people actually land them. They're just too big for spend gear. But it really wasn't until the year before last year that folks went out there with like their 80s and 130s and tried to catch them, with baits with bridle bluefin or bunker. I think once people started doing that, they started catching them. And as you know, the year before last year was really good. I mean,
Oh yeah.
the first time I did it, I let a bunker out 20 feet away from the boat and it got grabbed. Um, but the next 3 days I didn't do anything. But it's kind of like playing the lottery, and much more so now. But I think a lot of those fish that were predispositioned to come in here and feed on those bunker got harvested the year before, and the remaining ones are still coming in here, but there's just not as many of them. And again, I'm not a scientist. I haven't done any empirical research here, but that this is all speculation.
Yeah, it makes sense though. They were probably always here, and then
Yeah,
once everybody got dialed in, I mean that one year they really got a beating put on them. I mean,
yeah,
they
yeah,
it was lights out tuna fishing 3 mile
yeah. I
within
mean, the
three
other thing,
miles. I mean,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. The other thing is this year, you guys got busted, and I think it prevented a lot of folks that didn't have the right permits from doing it. So I don't. Well, a lot of fish didn't get harvested for that reason.
oh, a lot of guys got busted this year
A handful, yeah, did,
taking
yeah,
taking over slot or oversized?
Yeah. So, if the recreational trophy category is closed, which it usually closes like mid to late May, early June, then unless you have commercial endorsement, you're not allowed to keep them. And even if you do have that endorsement, you have to have a landings permit, which a lot of folks didn't have. And also, there were a number of days where you couldn't, even if you had the right permits, you couldn't fish for them. I think it was like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday or something, or no kill days. I don't remember.
Oh wow, I
But
didn't
guys,
know that.
guys were doing their usual Wild West thing, and finally the DEC started checking, and the DEC recently signed a contract with the feds to do federal fisheries inside of state waters. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
I have a question about yellowfin tuna.
sure.
The the ones that you see with like the big sickle fins.
Mhm.
Do you get those in over on our side, or is that like a Pacific
Yeah.
type of thing? I mean, and what
Well,
causes
so
some to get those and others
usually
not to?
you don't see them on fish that are under 100 pounds. And we do get them here. It's not frequent, and they're usually canyon fish that have those. But we had a bunch both this year and last year that had those big sickles.
That's so cool.
The yellowfin fishery has just gotten so much better in the last couple of years. I mean, knock on wood. Some years they don't show up at all, but it was like those squid boats, man. If you get behind them with peanut bunker, you start throwing them, and you have them boiling around the boat for hours. I'd never seen that before.
Why do you think it's gotten so much better?
I don't know, man. I really don't know. I used to think, I mean, the way a normal year ran, and I think the last 2 or 3 years were anomalous, is that you'd have good bluefin fishing all the way until late July, early August. And all of a sudden you'd catch a yellowfin. And you wouldn't see any more bluefin for the rest of the year until December when they came back down. Um, and I kind of always thought that it was a water temp thing. The water got too warm for them and they left and the yellowfin moved in. But now I think it has more to do with competition because, we're starting to see yellowfin in late June and early July. And once you see them, the bluefin are gone. And I think maybe, and again, this is more speculation, that, the yellowfin start to move in and the bluefin are like, too much competition here. Let's go north to the Cape. Um, the one year we did not have yellowfin, I think it was 2018. We had bluefin starting in mid-May and all the way through mid-September, and no yellowfin at all. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, dude. Every time you think you got this fishery figured out, it changes.
Do you think that there's a chance that the yellowfin could ever come in as close as the bluefin did?
I think somebody caught one the year before last year, like 70 or 80 pound fish in that. But yellowfin generally don't like dirty water. It's got to be clean. So I'd say it's unlikely. Bluefin don't give a shit. They'll I've caught them in 45-degree, dirty, like copper colored water. They don't care. Yeah.
Man, so any other topics we should touch on?
I don't think so, man. I think we all should just keep our fingers crossed that, these sonars aren't really as destructive as a lot of folks think they are.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things that only time will tell.
Yep. Yep.
So, hey, listen, we'll check back in later in the season, maybe after July when they're done with the testing, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully by then they'll have some data for us to talk about.
Yep. All right. Sounds good, man.
All right, cool. Well, it was great talking to you, John. I appreciate
Yep.
your time.
Thanks for having me.
just waiting for you.